That is right. I'm a prophet or a psychic when it comes to the stock market. Well, at least I was for like 24 hours when it came to the Amazon becoming a grocery chain. We're going to get to that, but this video is mainly about the stock market recap of what happened last week and some news items that are going to happen next week, which may change up the business world. So anyways, we're going to talk about the Amazon thing that happened. So for those of you that don't know, I was talking, I think it was Thursday or Friday, I think it must have been Friday, about how Amazon wanted to become a grocery chain. And this was largely because, well, they were hiring real estate managers, and I was expecting them to expand into a grocery chain store with Amazon Fresh. That's what I was expecting. And I was talking about how they would be a grocery giant, especially if it came to online sales of groceries. And I was talking about how the only thing that they were missing was the infrastructure of the actual grocery layout. I remember I mentioned that specifically, like the thing that Walmart and Costco and all those other grocery chains had on Amazon was that they had hundreds and thousands of stores, tens of thousands of stores across the entire world, essentially, in the United States. But and I was saying that was the disadvantage that Amazon had when it came to groceries and selling food. But then they changed that within 24 hours. They were probably watching me. They were like, you know what? You're right, Jack. You're right. We need to fix this. We need to fix this. They have too much of a business advantage on us. So what did they do? The Whole Foods stock was down 20%, and then they bought Whole Foods. They bought the Whole Foods chain for what was the number here? $13.7 billion. They sounded like Dr. Evil when they did that. So they now have at least some sort of infrastructure when it comes to running a food grocery retail store. And so, do I expect them to start selling online groceries at a higher rate than before because of this? No, I don't. But what this does set up is an infrastructure. That's what it is. They have an infrastructure to selling food, and now they have that part of the business set up. And I think the next step will be, well, first of all, getting Whole Foods, back to a higher earnings standpoint. That's the very first thing. But the second thing would be incorporating that into the online business. That could take years, though. And so I'm very happy with their decision. I'm very glad I invested in Amazon last week. And then the stock jumped up 3% in one day, in essentially a few hours. And so that was a good purchase. That was a good investment by me. Anyways, so some other things I wanted to talk about. Yeah, so they probably won't integrate the online groceries into the Whole Foods right away. It's going to take a long time. Maybe they purchased it for some other reasons that I don't know, but I think it's just because they want to get into that game. I think that they know that that's the next frontier for online business is the grocery part of it. I mean, imagine if you could just order your groceries on Amazon every week and just have a recurring thing that arrives at your door every Monday, every Friday at 7 p.m. How great would that be? I'd use that. I mean, the reason why I don't buy groceries every few days or every week is because, I don't have time. I only go once a month and I just freeze everything. I freeze all my fresh meat and everything. So if Amazon could deliver it to my door, fresh stuff all the time, that'd be great. I would definitely pay for that. So stock jumped up. And yeah, a lot of other grocery chains went down, like Kroger. Kroger took a big hit. They were one of the losers of last week. They were down 17% in one day. That was terrible. So that was the Amazon thing. So we talked about Amazon. Next thing I want to mention here is actually the Federal Reserve. So for those of you that don't know, I talked about this for a long time, for 20 minutes. I think it was on Wednesday. And they announced a 0.25% interest rate hike. For most of you, probably don't care very much. Meanwhile, you should care about the other thing that they talked about. So I'll talk about the interest rate first. So they had a 0.25% rate hike. 0.25%. So interest rates are now sitting at 1.25%. So it's a 25% hike. And for most of you that have a mortgage or student loans that have a variable rate, this is going to mean, roughly an additional $10 to $20 in monthly payments for you guys. So that's how it's going to affect you. But again, this is just the signal that this usually means for investors is that it's a strong economy. I think they should have raised rates higher, to be honest. So we saw stocks dip down right after this happened, but I said that they should get interest rates up to 1.5% because I think that we're going to have some sort of economic downturn coming, and you need higher interest rates so that you can lower them to get the economic boom going again. And that's just my personal opinion. They didn't raise them 0.5%, it was only 0.25%. What they also said in that meeting was that they were hawkish. That's what essentially they said. The economy was doing moderately well, they said. Unemployment was very good at 4.3%. But the thing that they snuck in there right at the end was that they pretty much stated that they are willing to make drastic interest rate changes and economic changes based on how the economy is doing. Meaning that they weren't too confident in this current economy. I think it's a little bit unstable. The last thing that they talked about was the normalization of the balance sheet. So for those of you that don't know, the Federal Reserve owns more assets than essentially any other public company in the world. They are private, but they're probably the most valuable agency in the world, if you can call them that. They're essentially a private company. And they own $4.5 trillion in mortgages and bonds. $4.5 trillion. They have roughly over $1 trillion in mortgages. So the odds are you have a mortgage that's backed by the Federal Reserve. Odds are if you're living in the United States. So what does this mean? What does the normalization mean? They mentioned how they really want to get that balance sheet down, their assets down, because they, I guess, see themselves maybe the public sees, like, imagine this. If you were to go up to a random person and say that the Federal Reserve owns $4.5 billion in assets, what would the average person say? That's not good. Let's kick out the Federal Reserve, right? And so they want to normalize that balance sheet down to, I think that their plan was to get it down to under $1 trillion in like 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years. I forget what they mentioned, but they did mention that. They said that, look, we have too many assets right now. We need to get this stuff down. And so why have they had $4.5 trillion in assets? It's because they haven't been using the money. So the government's been paying the money, and consumers and everyday average Americans have been paying the Federal Reserve money on debt and so on. But when the Federal Reserve has received that money, they've been reinvesting it in debt, essentially. And so that's why they have so much. And so what they plan on doing is using the money they receive to actually neutralize their debt. That's what they want to do. And I completely agree with that. Even though I'm not one of those people where the Federal Reserve is completely evil, however, I don't like how the system is set up. I'm just playing the game. I'm going to benefit from this game because I'm pretty good at it. But do I think that there should be one agency essentially ruling the entire economic system? No. We're going to move on here. We're going to mention tech. So tech shares, they were really volatile, I guess, this week. So tech was, I think that they had that one day where they were down 2%, but they ended up recovering, largely thanks to Amazon. So they were only down 0.3% by the end of the week. So I just wanted to mention that because tech is like the thing that everyone wants to talk about, and tech is so variable. Google took a hit on Friday and Monday, I think. So they're down. A lot of the tech companies did not do well this week, but apparently just because of Amazon and on a wide spectrum covering the entire tech index, they were only down about 0.3% this week, which is okay. One other thing we wanted to talk about was the Trump holidays, Trump corporate holidays, not his actual holidays. Trump corporate holidays. So in one of the videos, I think it was on Wednesday as well, I mentioned how Trump openly stated how he wanted to give a one-time corporate holiday to Apple specifically, but also all the other giant tech companies in America and a bunch of other companies just period from America. So I think that I mentioned that Apple had over $200 billion in offshore cash that wasn't in the United States, so it's not being taxed. And so what Trump is saying was that, okay, look, you're not paying any taxes on all these profits. So if you were to bring all of that money back, that $280 billion back, or whatever the number is, we will give you, instead of charging you the 35% corporate tax rate, we're going to charge you 10%. And so that way the federal government picks up essentially $30 billion in tax revenue, and Apple gets a big discount to bring their money back home. That's their deal. And so Trump actually might force the company to do that too. Here's something that isn't mentioned. I guess technically you can get something passed where you can force companies to bring their profits back, or else shutting down operations or whatever. And so he wants to do a corporate holiday, but I think where he's indecisive is whether he should force them to do it or give them the option to do it. So that's the opinion on that. So if you were to do that for Apple and Google and all those giant tech companies and all those giant companies in the United States, it could bring back $500 billion or even $1 trillion potentially. I would guess somewhere around $600 to $1 trillion would be my estimate. Because Apple's like 300 billion, right? So I'm guessing somewhere around $600 to $1 trillion. So for the American taxpayer, that means that could bring back potentially $100 billion in tax revenue, which that's like substantial. $100 billion in tax revenue. I mean, how much tax revenue is collected every year? A few trillion dollars? So that's a substantial portion of tax revenue coming back into the United States if you were to do that. One other thing I wanted to talk about was Bitcoin, because we did mention that as well. Bitcoin. So there was that kind of big scandal that happened where, I don't know, 20%, there was a virus that went out over the Bitcoin services and access where it was about 20% of people couldn't access their money or their accounts or their Bitcoin or whatever. And some money was stolen along the way too. And so that helped drop the Bitcoin stock about 17% in one day, and then it went down again the next day about 13%. So they've dropped essentially 30% in 4 days, and then it's actually, I think it rebounded yesterday. So they went from $3,000 for one Bitcoin to 2.2K after the scandal broke out, and it's back up to 2.6K. So people have made some fast money just by investing at Bitcoin at 2.2K there if they sold it off already. So that's what I wanted to talk about. That's kind of the summary of what happened last week for me. Now, just some upcoming stuff I wanted to mention was there's a federal bill that just got introduced today or yesterday. They're going to see if it gets passed and goes through. And it means that on the federal level, they want to end marijuana prohibition, meaning that they want to start to legalize medical marijuana on the federal level. And so what this bill pretty much says is that they're going to ease up on all of that prohibition on the federal level, and they aren't going to go after anyone on the state level. So if your state has legalized medical marijuana, like 29 states have, I think right now, this means that it'll be legal on the federal level within those states. That makes sense. So that's what this bill is about. It's also about they're allowing a lot more medical marijuana research starting if this bill passes. Plus they're going to ease up on a lot of the what's the word here? Penalties, I guess. Is that the word? Penalties? I'm not sure if that's the exact word here, but that's the summary of what the bill introduced is going to do. So I don't know if that's going to affect any medical marijuana stock or medical marijuana companies, whatever, but it's something that I'm going to keep my eye on. And the number one thing I'm actually going to keep my eye on next week is oil prices and oil companies. So oil has reached a 1-year low and is at the second lowest price it has been over the past 20 years or 15 years or so. So we've seen that reflected in a lot of oil stocks and oil companies. Their prices, especially on Wednesday when oil prices dropped, I mean, oil companies, some of them dropped 3, 4, 5, 6% in one day because of that. And so I was looking at investing in some of those. I actually did an analysis on Wednesday or Thursday on my stock market program, which you can check out on the link below. And I'm looking at them. I might actually buy some oil stocks. I'm not quite sure. I'll keep you guys updated on my program. I actually just gave so I made, a couple $100 this week from my investments, even though the market was somewhat static, not status. But, and so I gave, the video should be up by now, I gave kind of a breakdown of what I invested in, where I made the money, and so on. So if you guys are interested in that, check out the program. It's in the VIP program, stock market program, in the link below. So that's what I'm going to keep my eye on, oil stocks. I'm also going to probably make one more investment breakdown on my website. I'll probably invest another $1,000 or $2,000 next week, probably next Friday, or maybe I'll wait the next week for Monday. We'll see. And so if you guys are interested in seeing me actually researching stocks to buy, then feel free to check out the stock market program. It's in the VIP section of that, so you can check that out. Anyways, that's going to wrap this video up. Do you guys have any questions? What did you guys think of the stock market this week? It was a little bit crazy, but not as crazy as the end of last week. So I'd like to thank you very much for watching. You're all very beautiful people, and I'll see you guys in the next video.